automate self-service provisioning of developer workstations. The SaltStack team did a great job of coming up with a good title. If you came here expecting your mind to be blown, there's probably still time to find another talk. I'm a systems engineer at Overstock on our DevOps team. I've been doing system administration for about 12 years, mostly Linux system administration, but if you go back far enough, I was a Windows administrator even. A dirty little secret. I was supposed to have these slides approved by our CTO whenever anyone speaks in public. We didn't actually have time to make that happen, so anyone from Overstock listening in the future, please don't fire me. I like my job. I work hard. Overstock, we're an online retailer. We sell a lot of stuff via the internet that you can buy, including buying fruit with Bitcoin. So I bring that up. This past year, there was a project called Farmers Market, and it was to connect customers with local farms through Overstock, and then you can get fresh produce sent to your house. If there's not a local farm near you that will connect you, you can buy things from a pantry, someone that will ship produce distances, right? And last year, beginning of last year, we had a project to anything you can buy on Overstock, you can buy with Bitcoin. And we're one of the first online retailers to accept Bitcoin. I bring this up because our CEO of the company, Patrick Byrne, he's not afraid to take risks, and he comes up with a lot of ideas, and he kind of has a mentality of let's throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, let's see what sticks. And he's not afraid to do that. And so kind of how our dev organization is set up is kind of set up to help facilitate that type of mentality of like, hey, I got this great idea, let's work on it for a couple months, let's see what happens. And so you'll get developers pulled off of different teams and formed into a new team, or a new team formed altogether, or just teams being redirected. So it kind of gives you some background in how our dev organization is set up. We have around 300 developers across 35 dev teams. We onboard developers frequently. Frequently, I don't know what that means. It's frequent, It's not uncommon to have a couple start in a week. And more than that, developers can move from team to team, and that happens somewhat frequently. And so the tools they need might change as they move from team to team, and they might need their workstation or tools on the workstation to be set up in slightly different ways, or have new tools put on depending on what team they're on. What does DevOps do at Overstock? We do have a dedicated DevOps team with 3 people. I would say we're a little bit closer to the dev than we are the ops, right? We support all the tools needed for the developer. So we run our Jenkins environment. We administer all our source code servers, SVN and Git. Any artifact repositories we manage, and that sort of thing. And then we work with ops to, our operations teams are doing things like moving to OpenStack and kind of giving teams the ability to have self-provisioned environments. So you go into a web interface and you say, we need a new environment. Here's kind of the applications we need, in-house application dependencies, and spin it up for me. And so we work with them to move the development teams kind of into those sort of tools and kind of work as a bridge. And generally, we try to be helpful. So the problem is, when the developers start to Overstock, like any company, there's that get your environment setup time, right? And some companies treat this as like a rite of passage and kind of well, Jimmy didn't get his environment set up in this past week, should we even keep him, right? Or it's been 3 days, what is his deal, kind of thing. And they usually, sometimes you point them to a bunch of malformed wiki pages and that may or may not be up to date. And you say, your job for your first week is to get your environment up and running, right? That kind of sucks, right? Even if you're a seasoned, experienced, good developer, you don't know the ins and outs of the company and the domain-specific knowledge that you would need to know oftentimes. So a couple years ago, some of the architects at Overstock, they made a bash script, right, that would just install it would install Eclipse, it would do the Overstock specific settings, it would install your Java, your Tomcat, your whatever you would need for your development environment. And that was a huge improvement. And it generally worked pretty well. Until it doesn't, right? Until the script gets 300, 400 lines long. It doesn't work on the new version of Ubuntu, or doesn't work with the new version of whatever tool. And so our team, we're tasked with, let's get this fixed. Let's fix this large bash script. Some of the problems with it was it installed everything for everyone. It didn't matter what team you were going onto. You could be going onto the mobile dev team, which has a totally different set of tools they use. Or you could be going onto a finance team. You could be maybe a tester, and certain tools you need for testing. It didn't matter. It would just have a list of 10 to 20 things, and it would just install everything the same way. It took about 35 minutes to run. Which isn't great. Can I rerun it? Maybe. Yeah. Yes, kind of. Will it overwrite things? Yeah. I mean, we didn't, the script, it's not that easy to have exceptions and catch exceptions and do error checking and validations, just in this bash script. Yes, you can do it. But we weren't. And it was just brute force. It would just, okay, I'll try to do that same thing over again, and maybe it won't work. And so this was a real problem for people that had already started at Overstock, worked there 6, 8 months, and they get moved to a new team. They need kind of a new environment or new tools, and they would rerun the script, and it would, kind of help, but they already had what they needed with the script. It installed everything. But maybe they, removed that stuff, or it was a mess. And I would say this is not an uncommon problem in organizations. This is nothing new. We weren't tasked with fixing something totally out there. The goal, let's be helpful. Our goal in DevOps is to enable the developers to be productive. We decided we didn't want developers to learn a new tool. For sure, there would have been some developers that would have looked at Salt and said, this is amazing. And they would have dove in, maybe even making contributions. That would have been great. But for the most part, developers want to develop. I'm interested in Salt. I'm certainly not interested in Java data types. And a lot of developers, they would say, I like Java data types. And then let's keep it simple. So we decided, the developers are already used to this paradigm of just running one thing. Okay, I need a workstation set up, I need it configured. I'm going to run this one bash script. They're used to doing that. It kind of worked. Let's just keep it at that level. Let's just give them one thing to run, and it will set it up for them. Hopefully with a little more flexibility. The solution, I learned this from being around developers too much, I think. Throw it out. We can build it better. Throw it away. Sure, we could fix it, but it'd be much better if we just threw the whole thing out and we build it up from scratch. So the major components we used in our solution was we took that single script idea and we created our own. We called it a bootstrap script. And this would install everything the system would need. It would install Git. It would install Python libraries for our ncurses app. It would install Salt. And it would configure Salt in a masterless mode. And of course, we have a Git repo where we keep everything. We made a simple ncurses app. And during that initial script that would run, the ncurses app would pop up, and it would allow developers to select which components they would like installed on their system. And of course, we used masterless Salt. And we had quite a bit of debate on whether to use masterless Salt or go with a full-blown master. And there's definitely pros and cons of both. And at the end of the day, we decided we did not want to be responsible for being able to run remote execution commands across all the developers' workstations. Yes, it would have been helpful. Yes, when there's some security update or patch that needs and it has to be done, we could have done it very quickly. But we did not want it to be our responsibility or even have access to developers' workstations. We want them to have the power to run their own workstation and have them have the flexibility to manage their tools. And we have another team, we have other teams in Overstock whose job it is to do workstation support and to do patching and to do that. And the DevOps teams, none of those responsibilities really fell under us. So we decided to do a masterless Salt. So this is kind of just overview of what the bootstrap script, our custom bootstrap script, does. It only takes one argument, the username. And how many people are really new to Salt? You're just being first exposed to it. Okay. So this one argument, we end up writing that argument to a pillar data, right? And we store that username in pillar. And then the bootstrap script, it does some checks and verification. Hey, does this user exist as a user on this workstation? Are you running our supported operating system? Those sorts of checks. Installs needed packages. Those are things like, hey, you're going to need Git. You're going to need some Python libraries. Let's make sure those are there. And then it calls and runs SaltStack's bootstrap script. How many of you have used that SaltStack's bootstrap script? If you haven't, it's actually a very well-written bash script, or shell script. It's not even bash. But it's very well written. It works very well. You can just wget it or curl it, run the script, and it will set up Salt on a system. After we do that in our own bootstrap script, we make some changes to the SaltConfig file to make sure it's running in masterless mode. And then towards the end, we run this ncurses script, and I'll show that to you later. But allows developers to select which components they want. And then at the end, when they select them in the ncurses app, it actually is just building the top file, right? So it says, I want this, and it creates a top file for them, and then just runs a state.hystate. All right, so I'll show that to you. I won't run the script from the beginning because that's a, really boring. So our bootstrap script, after it clones the Git repository, sets up our dependencies, it's going to create a convenience tool called setup. You need to run it as root. And this is a subset of the states we have, or formulas. I don't know, there's someone from SaltStack. Do you guys refer to them as SLS files or formulas?
Yes, SLS.
SLS? For a while, you guys were state files. You guys were pushing formulas for a while. They call them formulas, but
Yeah.
all right, we'll call them SLS states.
Yeah, state files is a good catch-all.
Okay. All right.
I call it all that Python crap. I'm just a product manager, though, so.
Mumbo jumbo. I got you. So as you can tell, this is a very simple. These are some domain-specific things that you wouldn't know about if you're a regular dev. OSTK configurations, they need to be there. They need to be a certain way, or else your app's not going to work. And so I'm going to pick a couple of the domain-specific ones. I'm going to say OK. This is running Salt in masterless mode. And it's done. You can see it's made sure some default packages are there. Make sure the directory's there, a couple directories, and then recursively puts this config directory that has all the files and necessary. It has some OSTK keys, encryption, stuff you need. In this screen, the first time you run the bootstrap script, they're going to be presented with that. And for new hires, we encourage them to run it with their team lead. So when this comes up and they're presented, they're going to have no idea what OSTK configurations are or global.xml. But hopefully their team lead can direct them and say, what you're going to need is you're going to need this, you're going to need that. You know, you'll need Java 7. We don't use Java 1.6. We use Tomcat 6, not Tomcat 7. And of course, you're probably going to need Eclipse. But maybe not. Some teams, they really like IntelliJ. We do have or at least we're going to have an IntelliJ SLS. And with their team lead, they can go through and they configure their system. Let's do the same thing. Let's just do with it Maven 3 and install Maven 3 on the system. Now that's if you're a new hire. You know, we encourage them to run it with their team lead. But if you're moving from team to team, you know, you'll probably have a pretty good idea of what you need or what you're missing, and you can just run that setup, and you can add components or rerun components. And that's the really great thing about configuration management in general, is that it is safe to rerun, right? I can pick the same components, rerun it again, and it's going to check and say, hey, everything's in place, everything's good. All right, so it's actually going out to archive.apache.org and downloading Maven 3. It's going to run a checksum on that, and then it'll install it, depending on how quick our internet connection is.
Question.
Yep.
Do all of your devs use Linux workstations?
So the question was, do all Overstock developers use Linux workstations? So I would say right now, probably 80% use Linux workstations. They're not required or mandated to use Linux workstations. They might be by their team lead. They might come into the team and the team lead said, you're going to use a Linux workstation. But in general, we do have some that are using Windows, and we do have some that are using Macs.
Do your scripts, do your states support those users?
At this time, we decided to do just the Ubuntu workstations. I think in the future, the next thing we would do is target Macs. But right now, mainly just team leads, management directors. Very few devs have Macs. So we decided to stick with that. So looks like we were successful. We have a custom Maven config file that will put in keys and passwords so that it can connect to our repositories, our artifact repositories. And you can see that's all set in the settings.xml. And that's something, like I said, even if you were a senior experienced dev, that's just domain specific. Like there's no way to know what those keys and passwords are to connect to that. And so it saves them a lot of time setting up their system. The future. What future plans do we have for this tool? With the release of, I think it was 2014.7, you could use the remote Git file system that you can use in Salt. You can use that in masterless mode. Before, it didn't really work with masterless mode. So we're going to investigate that, and I think that would be better, because right now, we're cloning down a Git repo locally to the workstation and then just using that. But if we could just not even clone down anything and the script would just go to our Git server to look for what it should do and to get the states, I think that would be a little bit better. Definitely more formulas are on the way. The hope is even architecture, team leads, developers themselves will start contributing some formulas. And we have, it's in Git, we use Atlassian Stash. They can do pull requests to the repo right now, and we can add new SLS states. Get a master. We're still open to the idea of maybe, maybe we should have a master. Certainly for the auditing perspective of, hey, how many of our developers have a setup like XYZ, right? If you can utilize remote execution through a master, you can get those stats and those data. And like I said, if there's this big change that needs to happen organizational-wide, we don't just have to send an email and say, please update this config file. And maybe you still send that email, but if you had a master, you could go check to see who actually changed their config file or who read your email. But there might be a use case as other teams in Overstock, if they want to utilize Salt, there might be a better use case to have a master for those tech op teams that are actually doing the workstation support. Integrate it with ServiceNow, maybe. We started using ServiceNow at Overstock for the past year or 2 years, and some of the onboarding process is already workflowed and automated through ServiceNow. It sends to HR all the things HR needs to do, sends to the team lead, a development team, all the things he needs to do. With SaltStack's integration, we could potentially, hey, if we know the workstation, we can have it just pre-set up for them. Or the team lead can collect some boxes and have it already done. Questions? Yeah.
So you can select all these components to install, and then do you support like unselecting, and then it'll remove a remove package, so if they installed Java 1.7 and they wanted to write it again and uninstall it?
No, we don't, right? And you'd actually have to, if you wanted to do that, you'd have to actually create a separate state file that was like a remove state file. Like, so you have the Java 7 state file, and then you have remove Java 7 state file, right? There's no like reverse in SaltStack. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you, after this curses file, you generate the top file.
Yes.
Did you consider using grains instead, and then generalizing your top file instead?
Yeah, we have considered that, and I think, oh, yeah. So the question was, did we consider, instead of just generating the top file with the ncurses app, using that data and putting it into grains, and then using templates in our salt states to do that? And I think that might be a direction that we go in the future. A simple change that I think we'll make very soon is having that ncurses, if you rerun that ncurses app, just have it pre-populated, have it already checked, the things that are in your top file, right? So you can at least say, hey, these are in my top file, have them already checked, and then you can add or remove them from there. So, yeah.
Do you use this method to keep workstations consistent, or are you generally just using it for first setting up a workstation?
So the question is, do we use this method to keep workstations consistent, or are we just using it for setup? Right now, it's primarily just being used for setup. Although there are some devs that have caught on how useful this is, and we encourage them, just create a cron job, right, that will update your Git and will run a state.highstate, and they like that, right? And we've even toyed with the idea of like, hey, in our bootstrap script, we should have that just add a cron, right? We should actually have it add a cron that updates and runs periodically. And that might be something we do in the future. But again, we really want to give the developers the control of the workstations and not do anything, mandate them to run it every day or have to run it. Because, a lot of it is they're playing with stuff and they're changing things. And they want to, the OSDK configurations that are in production, maybe they're working on refactoring those, and they need to have it radically different from how the configuration management would have it. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. Yeah, you had a question?
I was just wondering if you've ever played with like containerization of your runtime.
Yeah. So our environments are so distributed that it would be very difficult for us to, even using containers, run full environments on a single workstation. So we haven't gone that route. Maybe you could get away with it for part of our environments, or part of our workflows, but in general, there's just too many distributed parts for it to work. That's why we've kind of have this, we have OpenStack, and through this OpenStack, you can log on to a custom web interface we've created and kind of select the components you need, and it will spin up the amount, whatever servers it needs to make that environment. Yeah.
Yes. I generally think it's a bit of a fool's errand to try to config manage workstations. That said, you guys are doing it. How hard is it? How many resources, how many DevOps engineers are used to like maintain these states? And do you find that the devs are happy with the consistency of those states all the time, or are you constantly getting feedback saying it's not right, it's not right, it's not right?
So the question was, it's difficult to do config management on workstations. How much maintenance does it take to keep all these states up to date? Do we get hounded? And the answer is, it's been primarily just me at Overstock writing these states. And I have had help from the architecture team, and they have written some states with me. For instance, the Eclipse state, they set up Eclipse exactly how they like it with all the plugins, and we worked on how to automate that process. And so Yeah, I agree. I think for the basic things that we started with, like your Tomcats, your Mavens, your Javas, I think that's fairly simple. More exotic things, it could get out of control if you don't get buy-in from the development teams to help contributing these states, right? If you start getting, we want, for the mobile team, we want to, whatever this testing frameworks and these things for iOS or Android development, all these type of tools coming in, we need them set up, then I'd probably get them to help write them and maintain them. So, hasn't been too much work as of yet. Yeah, in the back.
So, I think you mentioned that you're doing some key distribution with this. I assume you're using the pillar for that. I was just curious how you're actually controlling those secrets and where, like, do you have a centralized pillar or using an external pillar?
We're not using pillar for our keys, and the keys are for some of the SSL or Java encryption stuff that we do. And all those are, they're not secrets because they're just dev and test keys that are more available to everyone. Okay. Yeah.
So at this point, are you using your setups to do any more than just tools? Or are you actually using it for like pre-compiled? Your stuff actually works when I give this to you. You can actually run part of your app, whatever app it is you're trying to build on, you can actually run it already.
So the question was, are we using this configuration just to configure the tools for developers? Or are we going beyond that and setting up an environment so that they could run code successfully when they run this? And the answer is the former. It's just tools. And like I said before, you can run part of your application on your workstation, but in general, we're so distributed. If you want any reality or test it with any integrity, you got to push that to a dev environment to get that feedback. We're trying to make that process quicker and easier so that you can do that very quickly, right? You push code to your repository, it builds in Jenkins, Jenkins pushes it to the dev environment that you set up, and you can get feedback. It's pretty much as quick as you can compile, as quick as it builds.
So they're not doing kind of CI on their own laptops?
No CI on their own laptops. In our CI environment, again, we kind of have a philosophy is we're here to help the developers and make their jobs easier. We give them a lot of control on our CI environments. They can create new jobs themselves or clone new jobs themselves. And pretty much every dev has access. We don't have it locked down permissions-wise very much. So they have a lot of freedom on the Jenkins environment.
Is there any reason that you opted to go the route of building your own tooling for getting it started versus using tooling like Vagrant or similar virtualization technologies to get them virtualized and up and running in a I guess, more consistent manner?
Yeah, I know you can use Vagrant for bare metal provisioning, but that's not something I have experience. I mean,
Personal preference. There wasn't
yeah.
like a technical reason that prompted that decision.
No, there wasn't a technical reason. Again, we came in with the goal that even though there's a lot of flaws with the bash script approach of running a single script, we still wanted to keep it very similar to that approach for the devs, that there's just one thing, you run it, and it sets up stuff for you, and that's it. Yeah.
On that same note, you guys aren't using Vagrant, and you're not doing continuous integration on the workstation itself. Are the workstations expected to be actual like stage dev environments where they can actually see their code running locally, and do these scripts handle that?
So the question is, are workstations expected to be kind of dev stage environments where they can see their code running? And the answer is, I would say in general, no. Right? Those workstations, they definitely should be able to build the project. They should definitely be able to run the unit tests of the project. And they even may be able to drop it into Tomcat and run it as an application, right? And see the results locally. But not always. Because you always have that integration, right? There needs to be some sort of integration test that, does this work with all the other facets of the environments? So.
As far as distributing your state files, so I mean, I guess now you're doing it by pointing to Git repo. Would that be something, is that sort of part of your calculation around maybe moving towards a master-based model? That would sort of buy you the ability to distribute your state files that way, or would you still look to move towards a sort of a Git file system? In your experience, how would you weigh those up?
So the question is, why do we have our state files in Git? Or why?
I know what you do now because you're running masterless.
Mm-hmm.
But what's your...
Even without running masterless, I mean, you have to keep them somewhere,
Yeah.
right? Even on your master, I would recommend that really they,
You still want to source...
yeah, they stay in Git,
Yeah.
but they're just not pushed out from the master.
Distribution model, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that part of your calculation around...
I think I think it's really beneficial to have a single point of truth, right, for your state files, and whether that's your Salt master, or if it's a centralized Git repo that people are pointing to, you need somewhere that like, hey, these are the state files that you should be running, not whatever Joe's from his laptop or So. You guys have. I'm interested to hear if any of you are doing something similar or thinking of doing something similar or have any improvements that maybe we could think about. We've heard some about putting the stuff in grains instead of just rewriting the top file every time and looking at other tools.
Investigating is we have a lot of different engineering groups in our company use very different stacks. We've got a lot of Erlang, we've got a lot of Python, we've got a lot of different stuff. So one of the things we were thinking of is creating a Docker image, a base Docker image, inheriting from that, and then setting up all these different environments in those Docker images so that if dev comes on board, we don't even care what operating system they use. They just run, we're going to write some tooling around it, so they run a command, it checks out the appropriate Docker image, gets it set up and running, and then they can code against that, and then check their code in, and that will kick off. We're going to be moving toward a continuous delivery model, and so that'll check in the code, it'll go through the pipeline, and they can have something in production in their first day.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons I was asking about the containers, because that's one of the challenges we're going to be having is how do we provision the containers? Do we want them to be running minions inside the containers? Do we want to auto-provision them prior? There's a lot of questions that we're going to be having, but that's one of the things we want to be able to do. And the other reason is we want them to have that, we want to maintain that state. We want to own it. Like if we need to update Erlang libraries, we want everybody to get the latest Erlang every time they spin up their environment.
So yeah, he's saying that containers are a great way to have consistency and portability. And I think at Overstock, I could see us moving in this direction where we've started playing with Docker and containers. And it's very appealing, this idea that you can have this application in a container and you can test on it in Jenkins, and then you can just move the whole container into a testing environment, a staging environment, and then move that exact same thing into production. And to have it even go all the way from a developer's workstation all the way to that same asset being what's run in production is very appealing.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
SaltConf15 to build the containers and build up the entire environment for the developer. And the same salt scripts that we use within the developer laptop are the same configuration we use within our at AWS for a nightly deployment to test and from there go to production. We reuse a lot of the same scripts template already.
What did you say that module was? Salt LXC?
We're using Salt Cloud.
So you can build something that would run on developer workstation as well as in the cloud. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's
That's
what
what
we're
we
going
want to do as well. And I want the same artifact essentially running on my dev box that runs somewhere.
Yeah.
That's what we're at. And we have two layers of CI. You know, the developers do some CI testing within their own development environment, and they get switched out to Jenkins.
Yeah.
And we have another level of CI. And once it passes that, it gets merged with the code base.
Yeah, we're talking about using LXC containers and Docker containers. And I would say at Overstock, with having 300 developers, we're not a super large organization, but we're still large enough to have quite a bit of inertia in our development process and how we do things. And that being said, I think we move a little slower than small organizations, but we still have the ability to make big changes, so that's good. To your point about the different environments, I'd say most everything is developed with Java at Overstock, but that being said, we do have some legacy components that are written in C, so we have to, our build environments have to, support that. We also have things written in Flex, which is a real pain. But you still need tooling, and developers need tooling for that. We have some things written in Node, right? And internal applications, we're starting to see more things being written in Python and Django. And some of the ops teams are writing those tools. I think we're working on kind of trying to move those applications into our build environment. And so, yeah, even when someone like us that's 95% Java, it's like, yeah, but then there's all these other tools and things you need to account for when you're setting up workstations and continuous integration environments.
Any Rails apps?
We do not. 0 Rails that I know of. Once upon a time, I heard that we had some PHP apps, but I haven't seen them in real life. We have a couple more minutes for any more questions. Yeah.
Perhaps more of a statement. I think that's pretty profound what you've done, that essentially your teams behave differently and more nimbly because we're able to
Yeah, you're saying teams have act more nimbly because of some of the tools we've done? Well, thank you. That's, like I said, our goal really is to support and to be helpful to developers, and we don't want to be thought of or looked at as a roadblock. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So in the case of grain, it's probably not an issue when you're talking about workstations, but you're starting to move your desktop to the cloud and such. I find that having to reverse engineer the state of that machine if that machine went away, it's good to have it in a pillar somewhere else so that you can restore that layout. So I can tell you, that same issue came up, and that was the reason we didn't do grains, is because reverse engineering something is okay, but if it's not there to reverse engineering, it's screwed.
Yeah, talking about difficulty of reverse engineering, whether to put things in grains or not. And pillars. Pillars can be a little bit more dynamic. One note is we do use Salt in other ways at Overstock, at least the DevOps team. We use it to configure our tools and like our Jenkins environments, our Jenkins master, Jenkins slaves, certain slaves. And so, we utilize Pillar and grains more in those than we have, at least in the workstation setup. So I think we're out of time. Thank you. I'm still available for questions after if you want to chat. I love chatting. Thanks.